Are y'all ready for this? I told you. Leukippe and Kleitophon. Very steamy. Welcome to Ms.Interpretations. My name is Marin, and this is my virtual campfire, where I read Greek novels in English translations, so you don't have to. Let's talk about Leukippe and Kleitophon. It was written about 150 to 170 AD, and it's another romance novel that reveals the culture, customs, and communities of the New Testament world. Based on the number of manuscripts that have been found, 7 in Greco-Roman Egypt, Leukippe and Kleitophon was one of the most popular Greek novels. You're going to see why in a little bit. The story begins with the narrator Achilles Tatius arriving into the port at Sidon, Phoenicia after surviving a violent storm at sea. In thanks for safe travel, he offers a sacrifice to the Phoenician great goddess Astarte. She's known as the Sumerian goddess Inanna, and she's a dying and rising god. Foreshadowing, perhaps? Achilles Tatius then spends 2 pages describing in great detail a painting of Europa being carried off to the underworld by Zeus, who was in the form of a bull. It's too early for me in the video to name the painting. Let's just say that she did not consent. While looking at the painting, Achilles Tatius meets Kleitophon, and they start to chat. Kleitophon says something about suffering for love, and Achilles Tatius implores him to tell his story. Kleitophon's story begins in Tyre, Phoenicia, where he lived with his father, stepmother, and half-sister Caligone. The father, Hippias, decided that Kleitophon should marry his half-sister Caligone. Luckily, the goddess of luck had other plans. Hippias' brother, Sostratus, he was in war in Byzantium, and it was no longer safe for the brother's wife and daughter, so he sent them to live in Tyre with Hippias and his family. The daughter, Kleitophon's cousin, is the amazingly beautiful Leukippe. Kleitophon falls in love with her at first sight. He's a goner. Kleitophon tells his cousin Cleinias that he's in love with Leukippe, and he asks for his advice. Well, Cleinias is deeply in love with a man named Charicles, and after a few pages of them ranting on and on about how horrible women are, not kidding, and this is not the only misogynistic speech in this novel. Well, Cleinias tells Kleitophon not to be too direct. The more experienced women like that, but not the young things. Just be around her as much as you can and talk about sexy stuff in a more concealed way by telling stories loaded with innuendo. Here's an example of a story Kleitophon shared with Leukippe while they walked in the garden. There is among reptiles another sacred mystery of love, drawing not only members of the same, but members of different species together. The viper, a land snake, lusts for the eel. The eel is a different kind of reptile altogether, living in the sea, a snake in form but a fish in function. When they wish to make love, he comes down to the beach and hisses a secret song for the eel. She recognizes the sound and rises from the waves, but she does not approach her bridegroom directly, for she knows that he carries death in his fangs. She slithers onto a rock and waits for her lover to detoxify his mouth. They stand there gazing at one another, a continental lover and his island sweetheart. When the viper has vomited the poison that frightens his bride, and she sees the deadly serum spilled onto the sand, she descends from the rock, swims to the mainland, and coils around her lover, no longer afraid of his kisses. I was looking at the young lady to see how she reacted to my erotic lesson. She discreetly indicated that she had not been displeased by my discourse. Where the heck did a story like this come from? Actually, the ancient idea that snakes and eels could mate was recorded by Pliny the Elder, along with other stories about how eels reproduce. But the truth is, we actually didn't know how eels reproduce until just a few years ago. Eels are so shy. We couldn't figure it out for a couple thousand years. But suffice it to say that eels don't have intercourse, and they don't mate with snakes. So, while Kleitophon is clueless about eel sex, he does think he's doing a pretty good job of wooing Miss Leukippe. Like the other Greek romances, we have two beautiful people who fall in love at first sight, but have some obstacles before they can be together. Kleitophon is slated to get married in just a few days, but he can't wait to have his first kiss with Leukippe. Here's how he does it. Suddenly, a bee had come buzzing out of nowhere and stung Cleo, Leukippe's maidservant, on the hand. She cried out. Leukippe started up and, putting aside her lyre, diagnosed the wound and comforted her, telling her not to worry, for she could stop the pain with a simple 2-line spell, taught her once by an Egyptian woman as a remedy for bee and wasp stings. She chanted her formula over the sting, and after a little while, Cleo said she felt better. Well, as chance would have it, at this very moment a wasp or bumblebee was circling round my head with a menacing zzz. In a moment of inspiration, I clapped my hand to my face and pretended that I had just been stung and was in pain. The girl came close and took my hand, asking where had I been stung. On my lip, I said. Why don't you recite your spell, dearest? She moved closer and put her mouth near mine in order to mumble her charm over the wound. In whispering the formula, she lightly grazed my lips with hers. I silently kissed her in return, just suppressing the noise kisses make. And as she formed the words, opening and closing her mouth, she transformed that incantation into a steady stream of kisses. Then I took her in my arms and really kissed her. Girl, she knew what she was doing. And so did he, apparently. Well, Kleitophon's manservant, Satyros, helps him steal another kiss or two, and they try to figure out a way to sneak Kleitophon into Leukippe's room so they can do more. I know what you're thinking. What about Caligone? Kleitophon's half-sister. He's supposed to marry her tomorrow. Hippias, Kleitophon's dad, he keeps getting weird signs and bad dreams and thinks this is related to Kleitophon and Caligone's marriage, so he does postpone the marriage, but just for a day. Let's go on another little tangent here. Some dude back in Byzantium named Callisthenes wants to marry Leukippe. Callisthenes, yes, it's another name starting with K. Here's a chart, so you can pause the video now and read it to review all the characters we've met so far. So Callisthenes lost his parents at a young age, but he had their money and was considered an extravagant wastrel. When Callisthenes asked Leukippe's dad for her hand, he said, "No way," because he thought he was insolent and spoiled. I think he kind of was, because he was going to try and take advantage of the law that allowed a man to kidnap a woman, and as long as he married her before he got caught, his only punishment was to stay married to her. Dang. Callisthenes also decides to take advantage of Leukippe's dad being distracted by the war going on in Byzantium, and learning that Leukippe has been sent to Tyre, he sets out to kidnap her. Did I mention he had never seen her? Yeah. He had just heard of her beauty and said to himself, I deserve a woman like that. Let's go get her. Callisthenes goes to Tyre, finds out where Leukippe is staying, and stakes it out. Not creepy at all. It happens that the women of the house were to go out and observe the sacrifices made in preparation for Kleitophon and Caligone's wedding. And Kleitophon's mother isn't feeling good, so she stays home. And Leukippe pretends to be sick so she could have her little fling with Kleitophon while most people were out of the house. So Leukippe's mom and Caligone go out together with some servants to observe the procession of the sacrifices for the wedding. Callisthenes sees Leukippe's mom, and he assumes the young woman with her is Leukippe. He hires some pirates who then dress up as women so they can get close to the other women. And these cross-dressing pirates kidnap Caligone, thinking it's Leukippe, and hand her over to Callisthenes. Leukippe and Kleitophon don't have their tryst, but Kleitophon narrates, I breathed a sigh of relief at this curious solution to the problem of my wedding. Yet I was not without grief at the fate that had befallen my sister. I mean, seriously? The story says nothing about going to look for Caligone. Kleitophon waits a few days and then says, Leukippe, hey girl, you and me, let's do it. So they figure out a way to sneak Kleitophon into her locked room, and just as they start to get cozy, before they get very far, Leukippe's mom screams and starts to run into Leukippe's room. Kleitophon just barely gets away before Leukippe's mom bursts into the room. She's screaming because she has had a bad dream that someone is ravishing her daughter. You know, it actually makes sense. I mean, Caligone was just kidnapped in front of her, so I can see why she's on edge. Realizing that her mom didn't see that it was Kleitophon, Leukippe defends herself and her virginity by saying she doesn't know who it is, and she was too frightened even to scream.
Don't be suspicious, don't be suspicious.
Mom goes on and on about how horrible it is. Kleitophon and his servant Satyros, they get to Cleinias' house and they decide to run away. Cleo, Leukippe's servant, she catches up to them and she says she's running away before she's tortured by Leukippe's mom for allowing someone to break in. They all decide to send Cleo away with one of Cleinias' servants and wait to see if all of the hubbub all dies down. Kleitophon prepares to ask Leukippe to elope with him. And Leukippe is really catching it from her mom, so she goes to Cleinias and the others and says she wants to get away from her mother. So they make a plan to run away together, and the real adventure begins. Kleitophon, Leukippe, Cleinias, and Satyros, the servant, catch a ride on a ship going to Alexandria, Egypt. On the ship, they meet an Egyptian named Menelaus, who tells of a story of how his boyfriend was killed by a wild boar. Cleinias shares in Menelaus' sorrow because before they left for Egypt, his boyfriend Charicles was killed by a fall from a horse. Kleitophon mentions that it does look as if male-directed love is becoming the norm, and they have another discussion about which lovers are better, male or female. If you want to see how steamy this novel really gets, I'll leave a link to the book in the description. I mean, what do you think this is, HBO? If you've seen other videos in this series, you're probably guessing what comes next. Shipwreck. A storm comes up, and as the waves surged and the ship rocked, the passengers spent hours running back and forth from one side of the ship to the other to steady it. Apparently, Cleinias and Satyros have died during the shipwreck. Menelaus drifts to shore while Kleitophon prays to Poseidon, and the sea calms. Leukippe and Kleitophon are saved, and they pray to Zeus for Cleinias and Satyros. They rest at a temple, and they try again to sail to Alexandria via the Nile. But on the Nile, they are captured by pirates who took everything and tied them up. They again pray for their safety. The pirates plan to sacrifice Leukippe, a virgin, as a purification sacrifice. The Egyptian army rescues Kleitophon, but Leukippe is still with the pirates. Leukippe is led to an altar and sacrificed. They pour wine over her head and split her open. They took her insides to the altar and ate them. They put the rest of her body in a coffin. Kleitophon went to the coffin later that night to kill himself. As he lifts his sword to plunge it into his own heart, Menelaus and Satyros come running up. They've been resurrected. Kleitophon is so glad to see them, but he still wants to die. Menelaus replies, "Hold your sword. Leukippe will now come to life again."
Your friend here is only mostly dead.
Menelaus summons Hecate, says some kind of Egyptian spell, and taps on the coffin. Leukippe rose up, was resurrected. Yet the entire length of her stomach hung open and the visceral cavity was hollow. She collapses into Kleitophon's arms. How did this happen? When they were all captured on the Nile, one of the bandits had recognized Menelaus as an Egyptian and invited him to join them. But he had to prove that he had guts by cutting out Leukippe's. Also, one of the passengers on the ship with them was a stage actor, and he had a chest of props and costumes. After the shipwreck, Menelaus and Satyros had picked up the chest, thinking that it might have goods that they could sell. It had a trick sword, that disappeared into the hilt as you plunged it into something. Menelaus and Satyros created a fake stomach out of animal entrails and skin and performed the whole charade of killing Leukippe to fool the pirates. They smart. At dawn, Kleitophon takes them all back to where the army that had saved him was camped, and he tells the general the whole story. The general falls in love with Leukippe, of course. Artemis comes to Leukippe in a dream and tells her to remain a virgin until she gets home and she can marry Kleitophon. The general, not knowing Menelaus' relationship with Leukippe, asks Menelaus to pimp Leukippe to him. Menelaus stalls the general by saying, Leukippe, she asks that you wait a few days until they get to Alexandria. This little country town, everybody will know. The general agrees, but he wants to kill Kleitophon to get him out of the way. In a day or so, Leukippe goes into a psychotic fit, punches Kleitophon, and kicks Menelaus in the shins. They subdue her, but she remains wild until the doctor arrives and gives her a sedative. He continues to treat her as she continues to sleep, often fitfully. Meanwhile, the Egyptian army is called back up into battle against the brigands, so the general has to leave and Leukippe is safe for now. The brigands, or rangers, actually win against the Egyptian army, killing many of the soldiers, including a man named Gorgias. Back at the camp, Leukippe cries out in a fitful sleep, "I'm mad because of you, Gorgias." One of the surviving Egyptian soldiers, Chaereas, but not that other Chaereas. He comes back to the camp and reports that Gorgias, an Egyptian soldier that was with them in the camp, that he had died. But he saw that Gorgias had poisoned a cup given to Leukippe. Gorgias meant to give her a love potion because he was in love with her, but he gave it undiluted, and it caused her to overdose. Since Chaereas knows the name of the aphrodisiac, the doctor can give the correct antidote, and he saves Leukippe. The lot of them finally sail to Alexandria, including Chaereas, the soldier that helped to save Leukippe, and he invites them all to his house for a party. Well, Chaereas had fallen in love with Leukippe, and he arranged to have pirates steal Leukippe from his house and take her to their pirate ship. How do you think that's going to work out? Kleitophon and his mates flag a ship from one of the Egyptian soldiers at the dock who recognized Kleitophon from the army camp. They follow the pirates, and Kleitophon's boat draws near to the pirate ship.
Why are you doing that?
Making sure nobody's follow us.
As Kleitophon approaches, he sees the pirates cut off Leukippe's head and hurl her body into the sea. 2 sailors on Kleitophon's ship dove in and brought the headless body back to their ship. As the pirates kept sailing away, Kleitophon's boat still drew closer.
You're sure nobody's follow us?
But the pirates saw another vessel with marauders who they knew. They were posing as purple fishers. And now that it was 1 ship against 2, Kleitophon's group decided they should retreat. Kleitophon cried, "This time, Leukippe, you are without doubt dead twice over, divided in death between land and sea." They buried the body and returned to Alexandria. Join me next time for part 2. What will Leukippe's father think? Who will end up in court? Where is Kleitophon going?